Wait. Before we start, just want to make sure we're clear here. While this podcast talks about sobriety, mental health, and addiction, it is not meant to replace professional medical advice. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety.
I'm Kathleen.
And I'm Sonia.
And we're ex-sisters-in-law, brought together in marriage and bonded through our sobriety journey.
Join us as we talk sobriety, addiction, and everything in between. You're in for quite a ride. And our Substack is buzzing with amazing content, from creative mocktail recipes to insightful courses and reflective exercises. There is something for everyone. Don't miss out. It's a great way to add some extra joy and depth to your journey. Check it out. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety. Today we have a guest who is redefining what it means to live a truly holistic life. Dr. Erica Matluck is a naturopathic doctor, a nurse practitioner, a Reiki Master, a massage therapist, and a yoga instructor. Her approach is unique and integrative, and she has spent years studying with masters from various traditions around the world.
After working in the traditional medical paradigm for years, including serving as the interim clinical director of integrative medicine at One Medical, Dr. Matluck stepped away from diagnosing conditions to help people heal in a more profound and transformative way. Through her work with group healing, mind-body techniques, and emotional well-being programs, she has developed an entirely new philosophy of care, one that doesn't separate health from life.
So in today's episode, we'll explore the chakras as a framework for healing and how we can begin to decompartmentalize our health. And of course, we will discuss the role of alcohol, both as a form of emotional bypassing and a contributing factor to disease. Hi, Erica. Thank you so much for being here.
Welcome. I'm very excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm happy to be here.
So, Erica, how did you first become interested in energy work and the chakra system?
You know, it's a really interesting answer because if I'm being really honest, I don't know. It was something that I was drawn to. But then if I kind of jump up into my rational mind, I will tell you that a big piece of my story is that my mother had cancer when I was young, and we lost her when I was 11. And I think what that really did for me, as well as give me something to heal for the rest of my life, it really opened me up to this curiosity about healing and about what healing is and how people do it in different parts of the world. My mother went through conventional cancer treatment, and as a young girl, I just sort of knew that something about that path didn't feel healing. It didn't feel like it was going to save her life or improve her quality of life. It felt like, a slow, painful passing. And a few years later, I fell in love with the first boy I ever fell in love with. And his father had somewhat recently been diagnosed with another type of cancer. My medical brain today is it's like comparing apples and oranges. But his father went down to Mexico and he went to this alternative clinic and he was doing macrobiotic diets and IV nutrient therapy and all of these sort of more alternative approaches to care, and ended up going into remission and completely outliving the prognosis. As far as I know, he's still alive. And that really just kind of inspired my curiosity. So from then on, and that was when I was about 16, I became very curious about how do people heal? Are there other ways to do this? What does this mean? And it really sort of carved a lifelong journey of exploration. And one of the pretty early stops on that journey was Reiki and energy work. And I found a teacher when I was 18 years old that synthesized a lot of different sort of energetic. And what I think, this was like the late 90s. This was like a very out there and very kind of woo-woo. In those days, nobody knew what Reiki was. And I heard someone talking about it, and I had no idea what that was, but I just felt this pull. And I went to the teacher and I said, I want to learn about energy. And so that's like really, my best answer. And what is interesting is I started in what I call the woo-woo realms, even though I don't think that they're woo-woo. And then for me, my analytical brain really needed to explore the whys. So I started in energy work and then moved toward massage and then went to nursing and naturopathic school, and then took a job in a very conventional medical environment, and then found my way back to the woo. Although it's not so woo anymore, right? Like these other ways of doing things have really hit the mainstream. So it's been sort of I don't even want to say full circle, because I always think of it as more of a spiral, but I've come back to a lot of the early things I've learned with a new perspective and a new lens, because I practiced in a clinical environment for a decade with these sort of programs and understandings running in the background. And it allowed me to observe and test theories and sort of make connections in ways that I could never have made had I not gone into the conventional realms and really like had that kind of exposure and the kind of volume that you see in a medical clinic.
So, Erica, for our listeners who don't know, what are chakras?
So I'll give you my definition with sort of the disclaimer and the caveat that I think you could talk to different people and get different definitions. But the way that I use the chakras in my work is really as sort of an invisible framework that the visible or material body sits upon. And so what the framework does for me is it provides 7 different perspectives on self, or 7 different connection points between the inner world and the outer world. I loved the way you introed me, by the way, and it was very thoughtful. It wasn't something that I wrote. You clearly did your research and took some pieces. And one thing that I loved that you touched on is how my approach really doesn't separate yourself and your life, or your health and your life. And the chakras allow me to do that because they are windows between the physical and the metaphysical, or what I like to call the perceptual realms, like right where we can connect through all of our 5 senses, and the extra perceptual realms where there's unseen things going on in the field that we're picking up on but we're not conscious of. And I'm very inspired by a lot of Carl Jung's work, and one of his quotes that I love, and I'm not going to say it word for word, but something about, in order to heal, we need to become conscious of the unconscious. And what the chakras are for me are bridges between the conscious, what we're aware of, and that which we're not. So the way I use them in my work is not to, assign colors or frequencies, but to really look at sort of different experiences of self. And I break those down in a lot of different ways, from developmental stages to different themes or wound patterns or developmental challenges that we tend to be faced with at these different periods. And through that lens, I can look at how a central theme shows up in the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of the self. And this, for me, is like the crux of not just my work, but all of our work. I think we're living at a time where we have so much access to information, to modalities, to different ways of approaching personal development and healing. And it's really awesome. But I find that one of the big obstacles for people is it's very compartmentalized, right? When you go to your doctor, they don't understand what your acupuncturist is talking about. And if you say, oh, I went to my Reiki Master and they told me there's a blockage in my throat chakra, the doctor is sort of like, okay, what does that have to do with anything, right? And so what I love about using the chakras as a framework, and I could choose not to use chakras, I could find some other framework. But the idea is that I'm focusing on 7 central themes that sort of move through different aspects of the self. And we can look at how that shows up physically versus mentally versus emotionally versus spiritually. And for me, that means, physically, we're looking at the body and our sensory experience. And mentally, we're looking at what are our thoughts and beliefs about this. And emotionally, we're looking at what are the feelings, right? I think in conventional medicine or even in the field of mental health, there's this tendency to sort of lump mental and emotional health into the same thing. And for me, those are very distinct experiences that really need to be treated differently. Because my mental health or my mental experience is where I can really use the placebo effect for my benefit, right? I can really change my mindset and have an impact on my health outcomes or my life. But in the emotional part of my experience, I need to feel things. I need to really be with the emotion and let it move me to tears or to movement, or as my 3-year-old son often does, some kind of tantrum. And that's how emotion moves. So for me, those are very different things. And then there's the spiritual aspect of the self, which is more about our awareness. And we could even start talking about how when I set an intention or I put my attention on something, that becomes the foreground of my life, or that becomes the more likely outcome than anything else.
So that's a great explanation. And I appreciate that you gave us your take on what the chakras are and that using that as the framework. How can our listeners start to identify if they have blockages in their chakras?
So this is a great question. And that leads me back to the perspective of a Reiki practitioner who is working with the flow of energy in the body and what the chakras are from that perspective. And for me, when I put on that hat specifically or exclusively, what I'm looking at when we sort of look at these different aspects of the body, where the chakras are located or superimposed over the body. So there is actually sort of a physical or anatomical reason for why we might have more sensory sensitivity in these areas of the body or these areas around the body. And so from a Reiki Master's perspective, I'm looking at the way energy moves. And sometimes if I want to demonstrate this with people, I'll pick up a pendulum, right? And hold it over each of these points on your body. You can get a sense of how strong is the energy flow in each of these different areas. Ultimately, my goal for all of us is that we don't need a pendulum to know if energy is moving through our body, but that we're self-aware. And so for me, the process of healing is about becoming more aware of yourself. And I'm kind of getting to your question here. For your listeners, in order to get in touch with your chakras, you don't have to be so energetically sensitive that you can pick up a pendulum and place it a few, inches or a foot from your body. The point is, can you bring your attention to these different aspects of yourself, like these different levels of yourself, and check in? Is something going on physically in my pelvic region? If so, that's a way of bringing awareness to the sacral chakra, right? Do I feel something in my tailbone, right? Did I fall on my tailbone? And when I bring my awareness to that sensation, that is bringing awareness to this area of the root chakra. So we could do it physically. We could do a body scan and trace your attention through each of your toes and your shin and your knee. You can do the same thing with the chakras. Another technique is to breathe into each one, right? Because breath is also life force. And so a lot of the time, if I'm working with someone on Zoom, I'm watching where they're breathing. I'm watching when they take a breath, where does their body stop moving? And that might lead me to a chakra, right? I want you to be able to do it. It's not helpful to you if you come and see me and I move your energy for you, because any energy worker can do that. I can also very easily guide you to do that with your breath. But the real work is, why is the energy like that in the first place? Right? And so for me, it's less about, oh, your throat chakra seems blocked. Let's breathe into it and move that energy. And it's more about, what is that experience for you? And maybe you say, I'm afraid of public speaking, or I have acid reflux, or I'm really intimidated when it comes to using my voice. We talk about that. And the real work is not just moving the energy. The real work is understanding, where does that come from and how do we get to the roots of that and working there. And then there are a lot of ways to do that. And so you asked, if a chakra is blocked. And the way I think of energy is, there can be an excess of energy somewhere, right? Like I can have so much attention in my throat chakra, and that's imbalance, right?
Right.
So if we're talking about energy, I like to think about it in the same way. People talk about, oh, my throat chakra is blocked, right? And even just with that language, what we're saying is, energy can't move between my heart and my third eye because it's blocked here. And that's really never the case. Usually the energy, the flow is slowed or the flow is obstructed. And our work is about sort of balancing the whole system. And a lot of the time, so if there's a blockage, or, let's just call it, to please me, a partial blockage, if energy is not flowing through a particular chakra, then the real work is just to say, why might that be? And if things aren't flowing, where is there excess and where is there deficiency? Could I move that by massaging an area to bring more attention and sort of waking up the sensation in that area? Right? So it's very simple, actually.
Yeah, I think how you're saying it is simple. I think that so many people think it's more complicated than it is, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's this whole idea of mystifying everything, right? I think we live in this culture where science is not mysticism, and all of this stuff that, we don't understand, or we can't sort of see, touch, experience with the five senses, we call it mystic or mystical. And there's a lot of like classes and things out there trying to demystify things. And on the one hand, I'm a fan of making it simple, and I'm a fan of like making it practical for people. But I also think, as a mother, we live in a world that's so void of magic. And the truth is, like, these bodies that we're in are absolutely magical. And so sometimes I struggle with, like, how do we keep it mystical and magical and miraculous, but also like not let those concepts make it complex or unattainable, or something that you need, a Reiki master to help you access.
That's really interesting. So, Erica, how do traditional medical approaches create separation between different aspects of our health?
Well, I kind of see it in two ways. And, I always like to start with the fact that I see a lot of problems with conventional medicine, but I also see where it works and it has strengths. And conventional medicine, we have in our system generalists and we have specialists. And we need both of these things, right? Like if I have a complicated break in my hand, I really want a hand surgeon that only looks at hands all day long, right? I don't need that person to know anything about my brain or my heart or the anatomy of my foot or my chakras, right? I want them to know the hand really, really well. And so there's a reason why we have specialists and why our medical system really has moved in the direction of having so many specialties. And that really does serve us. But what is lost in specializing is the ability to see the whole. And, even if we look at an internist or a primary care doctor who is like as holistic as it gets in conventional medicine, the perspective is still pretty limited, right? The reason things are so compartmentalized is because we want people that are really good at really specific things, but there's a big cost to that. And the cost is, and also if we look at just like the value of the system, specialists are compensated a lot better, right? So who wants to be a family practitioner anymore? Who wants to be a generalist? And so there's incentive to specialize. And as that happens, and more of the generalists and the primary care providers burn out, we have fewer and fewer people in the system that really want to look at the whole and connect the dots. Our medical system, for a lot of reasons, is a problem-based paradigm, right? We very rarely do we go in to see our doctor to say everything's great. And very infrequently or rarely do people go for maintenance, right? If you look at therapy, mental health, if you look at acupuncture, if you look at Ayurveda, in these other systems, it's understood that maintenance is a part of health. But in conventional medicine, maybe you go for your well woman visit once a year, maybe not, right? And in those well woman visits, like they don't do that much, right? It's all kind of about screening and prevention. And rarely does a provider look at you and say, hey, what's working really well in your health right now? And so because of this, what's happened is you go to the conventional medical system when you're in survival mode, right? When there's a problem that you need to fix. And then if you want to get from functional to thriving or push the limits of well-being, you go to a coach or an alternative practitioner. And so we've developed this disconnect between health and personal development or self-improvement. And I find that to be very problematic, right? Because I want a doctor who went to school for a lot of years, who really understands how the body works, to be able to go farther than functionality with me. And if I'm going to go to a coach and I'm going to talk to them about how I want to up-level my career or discover my life purpose, I need them to understand what's going on in my body, because my body is part of my life, right? And if I don't feel good in my body, I can't thrive in my life. And so I think there's like all these different ways that compartmentalization is happening. Part of it is in this continuum of sickness to functionality, and then functionality to well-being. Those are like two very separate compartments that aren't communicating very well. And then there's specialization just with regard to different organ systems in the body. And then there's sort of the bigger compartmentalization, which I talk about a lot in my writing, which is we go to this practitioner for the physical, this type of practitioner for the mental or emotional, this type of practitioner for the spiritual. And then none of those pieces are really talking to each other. So then the client or the patient ends up in this position where they really are doing all the right things and they're investing a lot of resources from time, money, attention. But each of these practitioners that they're working with is taking them in a different direction. Not because they're doing anything wrong, but because it's a compartmentalized system and the different compartments are not coordinated or talking to each other. And this is like classically what I see in my practice is someone comes to me and they're like kind of doing all the right things. And they're so frustrated because they're doing the right things, but they're not getting the results. And so much of what I do, it's not that complicated, right? But it's like, how do we make sure that the efforts that you're exerting with your physical health are going in the same direction as what you're doing with your mindset and in the same direction as what you're doing with your emotional well-being or your emotional experience? And is all that in the same direction as your spiritual awareness?
So Erica, can I ask if we shift to alcohol, like from a holistic perspective, how does alcohol impact us as a whole?
There's this great quote that's something along the lines of everything is a poison. It's just a matter of the dosage, right? And I kind of want to like put a separate spin on it and say it's not just about dosage, but it's also intention, right? And if we look to history, the history of humanity, people have used alcohol in celebratory or ritual fashion for a very long time. And we're at a point in culturally where we have a generally, I think, problematic relationship with alcohol. And a lot of people are using it as a numbing agent. A lot of people are getting swept up into addictive tendencies with it. And a lot of people are using it to not feel the experience of reality. So I think my first question, if I were answering the question, would be, well, what is the intention behind using the alcohol, right? I know people who can sit down at a dinner and they can consume an entire bottle of wine without even tasting it or realizing that they've just consumed a bottle of wine. And so I think my first invitation for anyone is to answer that question for themselves by saying, how am I using alcohol? Am I using it to celebrate life, or am I numbing out? Am I using it to not feel something in my body? Am I using it because I feel social pressure or social anxiety, and this makes it a little more doable? So I think it's a really individualized question. And my caution sort of for everyone is it is a numbing agent. The more we numb, the less self-aware we are. So that's something I really want people to be cautious of. And the less aware we are, the more whatever is going on in the unconscious part of ourselves is driving the show.
Is that what you would call emotional bypassing? Is like numbing, wanting to feel what we feel?
So, what I would call emotional bypassing is not feeling a feeling. And alcohol is one tool that we may use to do that, but I could also do that with my words, right? We've all probably had this experience where maybe you're in a situation and a well of emotion comes up and you feel like you're on the verge of tears, but it's not an appropriate social situation to kind of break down crying, and your breath shallows and you start talking over it, right? Or you laugh. That's also what I would call an emotional bypass. It's like, how do I not feel the feeling so I maybe don't have to make this uncomfortable or awkward? But we can absolutely do that with alcohol too. We could say, I'm going to, drink through this uncomfortable dinner with my family at Thanksgiving and not have to feel all the feelings that come up around these old familial patterns that are often complicated and uncomfortable.
So what would the healing process look like when someone stops drinking after years of using alcohol as an emotional crutch? What do you think that would look like?
Well, I think that I think about it in two ways, because basically what's going to happen is when you take the numbing agent away, the feelings are going to be intensified. And so my preference would be that someone has some tools and is prepared for that intensity, right? And often in that case, I would always say, you don't want to go off this thing at a time when life is really, really challenging, right? And throwing like all these curveballs at you. You really want to prepare yourself. So I would say if someone is preparing to stop drinking, I would think about like, how can we cultivate some practices, cultivate the ability to sit with discomfort before they start removing that numbing agent, right? And one tool I like is a simple meditation practice where we sit still and don't move for a period of time. And we watch different sensations come up. Right. This is like one of the hallmark practices of Vipassana. Right. And my foot falls asleep. And what happens if I just sit with it? Yeah. Does it change? Right. And so this is like using sort of my relationship with sensation to train me to sit with uncomfortable emotions. And then also for a lot of adults that have been numbing, we're often not comfortable crying, or we're not comfortable moving our bodies when a big emotion comes up. And so finding situations, relationships, practitioner dynamics where we can practice that can be really helpful. So then when the person stops drinking and things feel intense, they know, okay, maybe I'm going to spend more time this next month with my best friend because I feel comfortable moving emotions with her. I feel comfortable telling her I'm just feeling like I'm on the verge of tears and like it feels really uncomfortable. And she might be someone who can sit with me and say it's okay to cry, right? I think that what that looks like is a lot of discomfort. And the way I would like invite someone to work with it is to prepare to sit with discomfort and understand the difference between when discomfort is self-care that we lean into and work with and kind of push against, and when discomfort actually becomes self-harm. And if that's the case, how do we want to handle that, right? And so the advice might not be go have a drink, but the advice might be like, do you have a sweet treat that you love, right? Could you take a bath with your favorite essential oils? What can we do to help you find comfort as you get used to a new pattern and as you cultivate the ability to sit with greater and greater amounts of discomfort?
So that's before somebody actually takes the leap to quit drinking. What about post-alcohol? Are there any practical, maybe even like daily strategies that people can use to reconnect with themselves after they stop drinking?
So for some people, removing the alcohol has a really big impact on their social dynamics, right? And in that case, I would think about being really boundaried about who you spend time with and how you spend time with them and what types of things you want to talk about and how you want to relate. And for other people, you remove alcohol from the equation, and it's a lot about how they sit with themselves, right? And then we want to look at how do we reestablish that connection without this tool or crutch or what, whatever sort of word makes sense for the way that they were using alcohol. I think the sort of overarching generalized word that comes up for me is self-awareness, right? So even in the inquiry of how does not drinking change my life, my relationship with myself, my relationship with my body, even by asking that question, we start to get into the awareness, which then guides what the practices are. So I think even just the inquiry itself or the contemplation of how is life different now?
That's really interesting. Erica, what are some common misconceptions people have about this integrative approach to medicine or the holistic approach?
Well, unfortunately, I think that marketing has really kind of devoured a lot of our language. And I don't necessarily feel like it's accurate to say that people have misconceptions, but I think what is accurate is that we use these words like integrative, holistic, wellness, well-being, and people define them really differently. And so it makes it really difficult for a consumer to understand what a practitioner or a book or whoever is using the language, what they actually mean. And so what I usually say is define it for yourself, right? So if I'm seeking someone who practices holistic medicine or holistic coaching, what does that word mean to me? And then I want to know the person who's on their website says, I'm a holistic coach. Like, what is the whole that you're working with? Right? Because back to our earlier conversation about the compartmentalization of things, if I'm a conventionally trained primary care doctor, it is holistic to, work with all the organ systems of the body, right? Like I'm holistic compared to a specialist. I'm holistic compared to a cardiologist that's really only looking at the cardiovascular system. So to some degree, it's fair for an internist or a primary care physician to say that I'm holistic. But if you're looking for someone who's going to, do lab testing that reveals what your microbiome looks like, or your cortisol test, or your vitamin B12 levels, and you go to a primary care physician, you'll be disappointed, right? So the question I always pose is, what is the whole? And this brings me back to the chakras, because for me, the whole is a dynamic concept. And if we're working very individually with a health issue, we may be working from that perspective of the root chakra, where we're just trying to establish safety in the body here. And for some people, that's it. That piece of work alone will be transformative for their entire lives, right? But if we come up into the sacral chakra, our emotions need to come into the conversation. And then if we keep going, once we get into the throat, sound and vibration are actually part of the whole of myself, right? The language that I use needs to come into the work that I'm doing with a client. And then the higher up we go, the more sort of woo-woo it gets, because when we get up to this perspective of the third eye, the self is beyond time and space. I'm working with my dreams up here. What is the common misconception? I think it's just like we're not all on the same page about what integrative and holistic means. And that doesn't mean that anyone's right or wrong, but it means that we really have to sort of talk about it and get clear when we're using these like buzzwords to guide who we work with and how we work.
You've covered so much today, Erica, in such a short amount of time. I'm wondering what are you working on right now? What's next for you?
That's a really good question. So I've been working on my Substack a lot, which is where we have connected through. And I started that from the perspective of like taking steps toward a book, and the Substack, as opposed to Instagram, was a place that gave me a little bit more space and freedom to more fully flesh out these ideas and share them and get feedback. So I spend a lot of time on Substack right now. And I'm sort of in the planning stages of some new courses, really focused on this idea of what root cause medicine is. And I really sort of want to take people deeper so they can start to understand how these different themes that are roots show up in the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of themselves. So I'll have some new things coming on that later this year. And retreats. I do 1 to 2 retreats a year. And one of those is happening in June in Mallorca, in Spain. And that one's just about full. So we have maybe a second one in the works that is TBD.
That's great. Thank you. And we'll post where people can find you in our show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today, Erica. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks everyone for listening to Sisters in Sobriety, and we will see you next week.
This was Sisters in Sobriety.
Thank you for listening and being with us today.
If you want to learn more about sobriety and meet your community, find us at sistersinsobriety.substack.com.
Are you a sister in sobriety? Then reach out on social media. We'd love to hear from you.
If you're feeling generous, leave us 5 stars and a review and follow us wherever you listen.
You'll never miss an episode. Until next time.